Hey, Gateway, this is Pastor Jason Crabtree. Hey, thank you for joining us for this week's Gateway Midweek. We are so excited to be invited into your home. And this week is another great week. I have a good friend of mine. This is Josh Miller, and Josh has done a Gateway Midweek with us before. We talked about spiritual freedom. It was around the 4th of July, and I think my big takeaway from that was learning about Josh's dog who gets dressed up and goes in parades.
Yeah.
So you'll have to go back and watch that Gateway Midweek. But hey, Josh, why don't you take a second and just kind of tell the church, a little bit about yourself, who you are, and kind of some of the things that you do here at Gateway.
Yeah, so I've been going to Gateway since like 2012. And in that time, I've just fallen in love with the church more and more and gotten more and more involved as the Lord's opened doors for me. Been a leader for divorce care since we started it, and that was 3 years ago?
3 or 4 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, we've done quite a few sessions and helped a lot of people, and it's become quite a good ministry, especially for present times. And then I've also led a small group for a men's small group for just anybody going through something. And now Jason decided to tap me for Gateway Midweek, so here I am.
Great. So Josh has been a good friend, and it's been cool to see, how God has been using him over the last 3 or 4 years, and just his openness and passion for discipleship, for coming alongside those who are in need, and really, like you said, there's things that you have gone through personally, which help kind of shape your perspective. Excuse me, and the things that you see through life. And because of that unique things that have happened in your life, you're able to speak into certain people's lives and use that connection. And it's been really cool, to see that. And so yeah, man, thanks for being here. So each and every week, we kind of talk about, or we look at, through the things through the lens of Gateway's purpose, which is invite, connect, develop, and serve. And all of those things, when you think about inviting people, it's, sometimes it's like, there's things that get in the way of inviting people. When you're connecting to God, there's things that get in the way of that happening. The storms of life, we kind of call them. And so Josh and I, we have been talking over the last few weeks, and talking a lot just about faith, right? And how do we look at faith during times of uncertainty? And one of the things that we were talking about is, in life, these storms hit us, right? And so these things that are kind of outside of our control that God uses to shape us, that God uses us to grow us, and to remind us, that He's in charge and that He's there for us, But there's other times, storms that we kind of bring on ourselves, right? Like, where we, know better, right? I think, Josh and I were talking, even from the very beginning in the Garden of Eden, you have Adam and Eve that kind of, they take of the fruit because they want to become like God. They want to have all that knowledge. And so, each and every one of us, there's things that are built inside of us where it's like, well, we want to be in charge and we know better than God. And so we have a tendency to even if they're really, really good things, is to really overly focus on that and have that be more of the center of our life and have that be more of the things that launch us into how we respond to others. But those things are not God. And so we kind of find ourselves in some trouble. And so I don't know if you've got some initial thoughts, from the
Yeah, I mean, just on that topic, I say a lot of the times in the group that I lead is I'll tell you as much about what not to do as what to do. The reason is because I've caused as many storms to myself as have been dropped on me in my life. But it's the storms that define us really, and it's the things it's our struggles, no matter what those struggles look like, that give us a glimpse into what God is capable of helping us overcome. So it's important to recognize those and identify them and understand that God's with us through them. So I think that's a lot of what, and golly, after going through 2020, I know there's probably been 100 sermons on this topic, but It's just a different world we're living in today as a result of 2020. And I think, as Christians, we need to be more prepared to respond to uncertainty and people struggling now than we ever have been. There's just a massive amount of fish in the sea, if you will, in terms of opportunity to serve and bring others with us and closer to Christ.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, when we look back in the Bible, we can look at the relationship that Jesus had with his disciples. And it took a little while, I think, for the disciples to get it, right? To understand who Jesus was and the fact that he wanted to work through them and not just work nearby them, right? Because they had a front row seat of seeing miracles and seeing these things happen. At times the disciples more concerned them with about who is going to sit next to the Father in heaven and who was the most important disciple, and they would quickly forget things that they would see Jesus do, and it really didn't affect their faith. It didn't affect their relationship with God, because it was just something they saw that they thought was cool, or wow, that was a huge miracle. But then you read later in one of the books of the New Testament, and how quickly they forget who God was. And something that Josh brought up, where you were sharing, a real big story is that story in Matthew. Why don't you hit us a little bit of...
Yeah, I think one of the stories that speaks to me, especially in regard to faith, that I think illustrates the point very clearly is the story of Jesus walking on the water. Now, that's in every one of the Gospels, but it's the most relevant to us the way Matthew tells it, because his interaction involves Peter being able to walk on water. Now, Jesus being able to walk on water is cool, but if you believe that Jesus is God of the universe, then, walking on water is like light snack, relatively speaking. But Peter being able to walk on water and having faith to go out and do it is really the story that connects with me the most, and I think illustrates our relationship to God the best, or to Christ the best, especially during times of uncertainty.
Yeah. As we read in Matthew, it was cool to kind of look as we were in preparation for this. Here in Matthew 14, there's a couple of things that lead up to this of Jesus walking on the water, And so, basically, right before that, John the Baptist is murdered, right? And so they tell Jesus, John the Baptist, he had some disciples, he had people that he was discipling. And so they come to Jesus, they tell him what happened. And this is a guy that baptized Jesus, right? So obviously there's connection there, there's relationship. And so Jesus goes into isolation to pray. And I think in a lot of ways kind of grieve and kind of go through the emotions of what it's like to lose somebody, in a very quick and unexpected way. And so, which I think is clearly when we talk about, Jesus, we'll jump into it here in a little bit. But anyway, so John the Baptist is murdered. Jesus kind of to go, and he wants to isolate himself to pray, and to kind of, I think, reflect on some things. But the crowd hears where he's going. So the crowd shows up because they want to be healed. They want to be around the one that's been teaching, that's been performing miracles. And so he gets there, he's with the people, and the disciples are like, no, just send him away, Jesus. Let's just get in the boat and go. And then the people there are hungry. So Jesus says, we got to feed them. And of course, I think most of us have heard the story of, there's, a few loaves of bread, a few fish. Jesus takes that, performs a miracle, and he feeds the 5,000. And so in that moment, Jesus sends the disciples out. He says, you guys go ahead, head out, across the water, the Sea of Galilee, head out. I'll send the crowd away, and then I'll come join you. So that's exactly what happens. The disciples get into a boat, and this is where we kind of pick up here in Matthew 14. It says, immediately after this is after the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat and cross to the other side of the lake. While he sent the people home, after sending them home, he went up into the hills by himself to pray. Again, I think it's very clear that Jesus puts an importance on taking time out for yourself and praying and doing those things to kind of recharge your spirit. So night fell when he was there alone. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble far away from land, for a strong wind had risen and they were fighting heavy waves. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them walking on the water. When the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. In their fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost." But Jesus spoke to them at once. "Don't be afraid," he said. "Take courage, I am here." So even in just that little moment right there of just, the only thing that changed there was Jesus showed up and he said, "Hey, don't be afraid, I'm here with you." Storm's still going on, right? So none of that has changed. And so then Peter, the only way I think Peter can do, calls out to Jesus, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you, walking on the water." "Yes, come," Jesus said. So Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water toward Jesus. But when he saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified and began to sink. "Save me, Lord," he shouted. Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him. "You have so little faith," Jesus said. "Why did you doubt me?" When they climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped. Then the disciples worshiped him. "You really are the Son of God," they exclaimed. And so there's a lot to unpack, in those verses. But one thing I think that is clear is that, when we read this story, we really kind of focus on, Jesus walking on the water and then Peter stepping out and him walking on the water. But clearly this affected everybody in the boat, and so I think that's where we find ourselves. Sometimes, it's so important to hear stories. It's so important, the things that are going on, as far as in ministry and the things that we're doing. Some things that we get to be involved with, and really get our hands dirty, and other things we're not able to be involved with. But we see those things and it proves to us who God is. And God's in relationship with us. And so, when we find ourselves in the storm, the uncertain times, we can be strong in our faith because of several realities. And we're going to kind of look at some of these realities. But before we jump in there, is there anything that kind of stands out that, as we read through these verses, that you were thinking,
No, I mean, the big thing is, God, you could do a whole sermon series just on that passage and just all the nuances of things to pull out. But I think one of the big things that, like I said, I focus on Peter's role in this relationship the most. And I think Peter's response to God, or to Jesus, and saying, "Hey, tell me to come out." And it's almost like I see myself in that moment and saying, "God, just show me the way to serve," and then going and doing it, and what that looks like. So no, I think we'll unpack the rest when we go through these points here.
For sure. So again, there's several realities, when we come up against the storm, and the one is that He brought me here. Right, the disciples were in a storm because they obeyed Christ. Christ told them to get in the boat and go across the lake, and so because they obeyed Christ, He was going to use this opportunity to perfect their faith. He was going to use this opportunity to teach them and to kind of test them. Because again, they've been seeing these miracles. They know who God is. They know who Christ is because they've seen it firsthand. So Jesus had tested them in a storm. Previously, He had tested them in a storm when He was in the boat with them. And now we find this other test when Jesus is outside of the boat.
Right. Because of that, they know He can quiet the storm.
Yeah.
I mean, He could have very easily just hit the off switch and said, "Yeah, no more storm."
For sure.
But He intently did the opposite. Did not do that.
Yeah. As believers, sometimes we have mistaken the idea that because we are obeying God's will, that it's going to just produce smooth sailing, right? We're not going to run into any kind of problems. Everything's just going to be perfect. But we all know that this is not true. Like we find ourselves in the storm because we have obeyed the Lord. We must remember that He brought us here, and He can care for us, right? In John 16:30, it says, have peace. In this world, you're going to experience many trials. You're going to experience your sorrows, right? But take heart, because I have overcome the world. And so knowing that Jesus, He brings us into these situations, and when I say teach us a lesson, it's not like a
spanking.
A spanking, right? Yeah, exactly. But it's like, hey, we're going to use what's happening in life to really define what your relationship with me is, and knowing that I brought you here, that I brought you here, and that He can care for us in those moments, because God can do that. And so, that's a reality that we face, when the storms come. And so I think it is very key. The second one is that He knows me, right? Jesus saw the disciples. He knew their plight. He knew that they were scared. He knew that they were fearful. He knew that they were worried. And He knows those same things about us, right? He knows the things that we need, the things that we don't need. And the fact is that Jesus feels our burdens. He knows what we're going through. And so again, because we just read how Jesus has just lost his best friend, right? Like we've read other stories about, when Lazarus, dies.
Right.
Jesus shows up and He weeps, and so we forget sometimes that, yes, Jesus was 100% God in flesh, but He was 100% flesh also. So He's feeling these things. He's feeling the heaviness of things that are happening, losing loved ones, being pulled in so many directions, trying to build in relationships, and maybe bumping up against the frustration of, when are these disciples going to get it? Like, when are they going to really finally believe, And so, but He knows us. He knows what we're going through.
I would also add to that, He knows what we're capable of.
Yeah.
So, you hear all the time, God's never going to bring you to something you can't overcome. And that's really true. When you look at the story, He doesn't tell everybody to get out of the boat. He tells Peter, because He knows Peter has the faith to manifest that walking on water.
Yeah.
But He doesn't tell the rest of them to get out, because he'd probably have a drowning incident on his hands. But I like how the point you illustrate about being that example of faith to others. It's not necessarily anything Peter said, but it was just the example of his faith that was able to strengthen the faith of the rest of the guys in the boat. Mm-hmm. It's not anything he said to them. It's just following what God told him to do. And as a result, they were all blessed and their faith grew together. But point is God knows what you're capable of. And just because you're not called out of the boat doesn't mean He doesn't have different plans for you in another way. He has, Paul talks about the many parts of the body that make up the example of the church. And this is a great example of that again. There's so many different people called to different missions and different parts that you just got to be ready for your piece, whatever that looks like.
Yeah. Peter got out of the water, or got out of the boat, stepped onto the water. The other guys, didn't. They stayed in the boat. But then when Jesus got in the boat, they all worshiped.
Yeah.
They all came to the realization of, this guy's legit. He's the real deal. And kind of coming in, in the realization of that, again, these realities of that, that Jesus sees our needs. He knows our fears, and He is in control of the situation. And I think one of the things that you were talking, about, Josh, was the thought on how we can so easily, when things get out of control, or we're expecting maybe a certain turnout, and things don't happen the way we expect them to turn out. There's many examples that we can give, that kind of look at that. But But it kind of at times leads us down this road of just worrying, right? Like we start to just overly focus on certain things, and we just start to worry, and that worry really starts to dictate how we live our life. So I think a lot about that as the disciples were in the boat. They think they see a ghost. There's just worry and fear, and it affects the way they respond. It reflects what they focus on. And so I know you had some thoughts about worry.
Yeah, especially, geez, and going through 2020, it seems like there was every day there was something new to worry about. But I just saw, and I'm probably as guilty of this as anybody else, but there's just a lot of borrowing trouble that isn't yours, or borrowing worry that isn't yours. I wrote down a great quote in regard to that by Mark Twain, where he says, "Worrying is like paying a debt you don't owe." And it's a human thing. It's very in our nature to worry about things and be anxious. But regardless of what the world holds for us, what the outcome of an election is, it's going to happen with the pandemic, or whether or not you're going to be able to have toilet paper tomorrow. The reality is that we have an upper hand compared to everybody else out there. As a believer, as someone that has faith in Christ, I know who wins in the end. I know the story. I know what the story looks like. Now, the smaller parts in between, whatever. But I know that God is the one, Jesus is the one that secured the ground that I'm going to walk on. Mm-hmm. So, worrying about it isn't the example we want to set. I say this a lot, but, as Christians, I feel like we're supposed to be the lighthouse on the shore. So the waves may be crashing around us, but we are the light for the world that is supposed to show strength and foundation and solidarity, whatever's going on. And we can do that because we know the Creator.
Yeah, for sure. I think that is so important. When we're looking at here, another one of the realities is that He will come to me. Jesus always comes to us in the storms, but He may not come at the time that we think He should come. And I think that's what maybe fires up some of those worries, is
right.
The fact that we're thinking there's going to be a certain outcome or God's going to show up and do X, Y, and Z, and it's all going to work on our timeline. And when it doesn't, we're like, oh, it throws us in this world of panic. I remember a long time ago, back in my songwriting days, I remember I was working on a song and I wrote this lyric that God is never early, but He's never late. He's never late. And it's not about our timing. It's about His timing. The disciples had been in the storm for a while. Why did Jesus wait till 3:00 in the morning before He went out there?
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know. And so God works on His time. And I wrote this down, which I think is really cool. You ask this question: why did Jesus walk on the water? To show His disciples that the very thing they feared was only a staircase for Him to come to them. Fear and faith cannot live in the same heart, for fear always blinds the eyes to the presence of the Lord. And I think, man, it's so easy for us we can, and like you said, when you're reading this story, about Jesus walking on the water and how Peter is there, and there's that moment where Peter is connected, right? He's looking at Christ. He's walking on water, right? Which is just, insane to think about. Not the fact that Jesus is walking on water. He's Jesus, right? Like He just has performed miracles. He turned 2 loaves and 5 into 5,000. He's performing miracles. But the fact is that just through relationship, Peter's able to do the things of Christ
And proximity.
Yeah.
In proximity. I mean, the closer he gets to God, only when he breaks his gaze does Peter end up sinking in the story. Yeah. But the proximity and closeness. As he draws nearer to God, God draws nearer to him, and
Yeah.
he's able to do incredible things.
Yeah. And so you think about, again, there's a proximity. Peter's there. He's right there with Christ. They're walking on the water. They're connected. But look how easy it is for Peter to get distracted by the things that are going on beside him.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, a wave, maybe it slaps him in the face.
Or look at the boat. Look at the boats back there.
The boat. I mean, there's just, there's no telling, what distracted him, but something distracted him. He looked away from God, and he immediately began to sink. I've seen many, as a kid, I think, I get this image of just almost like quicksand, of where Peter maybe slowly starts to sink, as God's presence like slowly is taken away from him. Like, I just really think that like literally within a split second, he's under the water. I mean, that's what I would think would most likely happen. It's not this, I slowly looked away from God, so like now I'm going to go down to like waist, but I'm still okay. I immediately think he just went under the water.
Deep.
And Christ reaches out and picks him up. And then they get back in the boat, right? They get back to, we still got to do work. We still have got to get in the boat and finish our travels and continue on to the things that we're supposed to be doing. And so,
I like that. I want to make a point on that sinking part. There's 2 points that I want to make. One, that in terms of sinking, I know 2020, like, again, I keep hitting back on this, but I know personally of a lot of people, just based on the ministries that I'm involved in, that, there's people headed on a right path, to a good direction, really felt strong, and everything associated with 2020 broke their gaze from what they were doing, broke their gaze from Christ, and they started to sink. And you're right, it's not a slow and steady always. Mm-hmm. It is rapid. But the important part in that story is all it required for Peter to do was turn his gaze back and look back and ask for help. Yeah. And it was there. And it's the same thing for us. I mean, I know the pit seems deep, really deep at times. But it's one decision, it's one day, it's one moment that we can go from sinking to not be sinking.
Yeah. Yeah, it happens quick. And so finally the last, reality that we look at that we can be strengthened in our faith is this reality is that he will help grow. He will help us grow. And I want to read this. This was the whole purpose of the storm, to help the disciples grow in their faith. Right? Christ had been teaching them. He's been showing them things. They've been in this relationship with each other. He's been teaching. He's been performing miracles, but yet they still didn't get it. And so, Jesus uses this storm as an opportunity for the disciples to grow in their faith. The storms of life are not easy, but they are necessary. I think about this last year, and even as we continue in 2021, there's that sense of fatigue. That's one word that I've thought a lot about, that sense of just being fatigued and just, I'm getting so tired of the mask. I'm getting so tired of things not being normal, right? Like the things that we have to make adjustments to. But I also look at that and I think about the things that God has taught me personally, the things that I've been able to focus on that normally I would have not focused on, that I've been able to make some changes in my life and to grow in my faith. I've seen that in other people. And so I love that. The storms of life are not easy, but they are necessary. And I really think in a lot of ways, the tragic things that have been happening over this last year, and the list is long. How much have we learned about ourselves? How much more have we learned about God during this time? And so I think that's a whole other topic. But anyways, let me continue to read here. They teach us to trust Jesus Christ alone and obey His word, no matter what the circumstances may be. Faith is not believing in spite of evidence, but believing in spite of consequence. And I don't even think I'm reading that right, but no, it's that sense of no matter what, no matter what the circumstances may be, is that, we don't always need the evidence of knowing 100% that this is what God's going to do. If we knew 100%, we wouldn't need faith, right? But we step out on faith because we know who God is. We know He's going to show up. We know that He's going to be with us. We know that no matter what happens, He cares for us, and that we don't have to worry. We don't have to be afraid, because we know that God has a plan and that He's going to teach us through whatever we're going through. We're going to become stronger. We're going to become better for it. And again, I think it's key, because as you were talking earlier, Josh, about when we get into this thing of this mindset of worry and fear, and how that affects other people. And just the opposite, when we are connected to God,
Yep.
and we're going through life in those times of uncertainty, and we don't worry, and we don't have fear, but we have faith in God that He's going to work these things out, that also affects those around us.
Yeah, I mean, with all the loss, like you were talking about, in that people have experienced more recently, the reality is the time for the church has never been better, in my opinion. It feels kind of terrible because I haven't been open, and then there's all these restrictions, and life is just kind of rough.
Yeah.
But the reality is the crop is big. And we are supposed to harvest that crop. And people are hurting, people are struggling, and they are looking for answers, and they are looking for something firm to stand on. And, us just being that example of being able to stand on a firm foundation in our confidence is really can be the simplest thing to lead others to Christ. Being that lighthouse.
Yeah. I think it's key to remember that in all of the things that I've seen a lot of people focus on, and you just can scroll through Facebook and you can see what I'm talking about.
Yep.
But the reality is that if we call ourselves believers, if we call ourselves followers of Christ, He has called us to something bigger. He has called us to something bigger, and like you said, it's to connect with those who are in need. And to live out our faith in a way that affects those around us. Again, just like we read in that story, there's guys that were in the boat that were watching everything go on, and the interaction that Peter had with Jesus, it affected those that were also watching. Just like our interaction with Christ, the things that we say, the things that we do, it's going to affect those around us in a positive way. If we are living and doing the things that God's called us to do, and focus on the things that God's called us to focus on, it's really going to make a difference. And so, Jay, I don't know if you have any final thoughts.
No, I would just say, in closing, I would say keep your gaze focused on Christ, and step out in faith in everything you do, from really the small things to the big things. Step out in faith, knowing that He has already secured the way. I don't know how the story goes in between the blanks, but I know who wins in the end. Yeah. So, whatever happens in between, I'm gonna focus on what I can control.
Yeah. And
my little, I like to think I'm kind of a big deal sometimes, but really what I can control is pretty small. Focus on that. Yeah. And don't borrow trouble that isn't yours.
Yeah. And I mean, I think as we look at this story in Matthew, as we look at this, Jesus walking on the water and the interaction there, and Peter taking that step of faith and Jesus calling him out. As I look at that story, it just reminds me of guys like Josh, the individuals that I know that are connected to Gateway, that through the years, man, we've had conversations where you have said literally, I think God's calling me to do this. I'm not sure, but I'm going to take a step of faith and do it. And knowing that, that there's people around you that have supported you in those decisions. And it's been cool to see as you have stepped out on faith, how it's kind of played out over the years. And I know we've had conversations where you're like, man, I may not be the best guy to do this, or I'm just, maybe I'm not, equipped to do the things that I really feel God's called me to do. And so in a lot of ways, you in the past have held back and not do the things that you felt like God's calling you to do. And I think it's been so cool to see you get to that place of going, you know what, I know who God is. I know what his word says. And so I need to start stepping out and doing these things that God's called me to do. I've seen that in Josh. I've seen it in many others that are going to be joining us for future Gateway Midweeks. And I think it's a huge encouragement to us as a church to be reminded that we all have friends. Gateway is filled with people that God is calling them to do things, and because of fear and worry, you may have not stepped out yet. But man, we read this story and we know that, man, God has us. He's there for us. He's going to help us grow. He's called us out. He is saying, come to me, right? Like, let's do this together. And so I want to encourage you to focus on the things that you need to focus on. The fact that faith and fear cannot be together in the same heart, and that knowing that God is with us, I think is such a great reminder as we continue to just go through this life together and all these uncertainties, and just be patient with each other. But again, looking for those opportunities to step out and to allow God to be God, and to learn and to grow and to live faith during uncertain times. And so good. I'm glad we've had this conversation.
Me too.
And so I wish we would have filmed this when we were talking. Just a few weeks ago, Josh and we were at his house having dinner, kind of talking about this. I was on one side of the table, and Josh was about 12 feet at the other end of the table, and so it was great. But no. So yeah. Hey, thanks for joining us for this week's Gateway Midweek. We hope that it was encouraging to you to just talk about faith and uncertainty, and just looking at what the Word of God tells us. And so. Again, most of you, there's a lot of questions on what things are happening as things as things are starting to kind of go back and reopen, and what that looks like. There's two things that I really want to encourage you to do. Number one is to continue to take a look at that weekly update the church puts out every Tuesday at 3 o'clock on all of our social media. We send out an email, so make sure you're checking your email. But we're always sending out weekly updates of things that are happening in the church, what things that are coming up, when we're going to reopen, what does that look like, how are we going to continue to worship, and the options. And so really want to encourage you. There's a lot of ministry things that are happening, different things to get connected with. So make sure you're looking at that update each and every Tuesday at 3 o'clock. And the other thing that I really want to encourage you to do is continue to think about Gateway Takeout as supporting local business. Each and every week, we bring that to you on Sundays. Here are the two restaurants that Gateway has kind of picked, these local restaurants. And we want to support these local restaurants. And just the other day, as I was out filming for future restaurants, I noticed one restaurant that we featured a few months ago that is no longer in business. Yep. And so, man, my heart just goes out, there's so many new restaurants that are opening up, new things that are happening here in town, new construction of new restaurants, and you think, oh man, it's really cool. There's going to be new places to eat. But there are a number of smaller places that are really still being affected through this pandemic. So I just really want to encourage you to take that opportunity to support local, because it does make a difference, even if it just gives somebody an extra couple of weeks to kind of figure out what their next step is and what they're going to do, and tough decisions that have to be made.
Yeah, and can I make a point on that?
Yeah, go for it.
Especially, I know Grubhub and DoorDash and everything's a big deal right now. But the restaurants really don't make any money off of that. So try to call the restaurant, place an order, and go pick it up. We need excuses to get out of the house anyways. So
So I want to encourage you to continue to do that. Make sure to hashtag Gateway Don't Quit. Support those local businesses. It's been great to have conversations with the owners and just how much they appreciate what we're doing. They know about it. They hear about it. And so it does make a difference. And so, hey, Gateway, thank you so much again for joining us. We'll continue to connect with you because that is what we do. Hey, have a blessed rest of the week. Thanks for joining us tonight.